This is the Anarcho-Taoist coming to you from Melbourne, Australia. I begin this video with a passage from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the book So Long and Thanks for All the Fish by Douglas Adams. This is a conversation between Arthur and Ford about a very ancient democracy. On its world, the people are the people, the leaders are the lizards, the people hate the lizards, and the lizards rule the people. Odd, said Arthur. I thought you said it was a democracy. I did, said Ford. It is. So, said Arthur, hoping he wasn't sounding ridiculously obtuse. Why don't the people get rid of the lizards? It honestly doesn't occur to them, said Ford. They all get the vote. So they all pretty much assume that the government they're voted in more or less approximates to the government they want. You mean they actually vote for the lizards? Oh yes, said Ford with a shrug. Of course. But, said Arthur, going for the big one again, why? Because if they didn't vote for a lizard, said Ford, the wrong lizard might get in. Got any gin? What? I said Ford, with an increasing air of urgency creeping into his voice. Have you got any gin? Oh, look. Tell me about the lizards. Ford shrugged again. Some people say the lizards are the best thing that ever happened to them, he said. They're completely wrong, of course. Completely and utterly wrong. But someone's got to say it. But that's terrible, said Arthur. In Melbourne, Australia, as in many places, if you wanted a new pair of shoes, you could go to a local shoe store because it's convenient and perhaps you just want to support the businesses in your local area. You could also go to a shoe store on Smith Street if you have ethical concerns and buy vegan shoes. You could go to a huge department store that has a very big range of shoes for you to choose from. You could go to a specialist businesswear shoe store. You could go to a specialist sportswear shoe store. You have all these choices and you have the option of shopping around for the best price as well, or the best service. Now, let's say you move to another country and you're in need of new shoes. So you had to move to this new country for work or whatever the reason may be. And so you ask, hey, I need some new shoes. This person directs you to a store. You go in and you ask to see some shoes, and there's a sales assistant and she gives you a catalogue. So you look through the catalogue and you see some Doc Martens and you think, that looks great. So you go up and order these Doc Martens, give your shoe size and ask to try them on. And the sales assistant says, well, we're going to have to, just write down your preference and you'll have to come back in 2 weeks. You think, well, this is odd, it's not like the shoe stores where I came from. But oh well, you come back in 2 weeks and the woman hands you a pair of shoes. And you open up the box and rather than being the Doc Martens that you wanted, you have a pair of very comfortable sports shoes. You look at them and they're not even the right size. So you go up to the lady and say, hey, this is not what I ordered. And she says, okay, obviously, you're not around from around here. So what happens is you come in and you put in a preference for the shoe that you want, and so does everybody else. So when we do an order, whatever shoe is the most popular, That's what we order in. Now, I ask you, which option works better? The free market or democracy? Emma Goldman once said that if voting changed anything, they'd make it illegal. In Australia, this hasn't happened yet, but when voting has threatened to actually be kind of representative of what people want, they have changed the law. Case in point is Albert Langer, an activist who in the early to mid-late 90s was telling people about their voting rights. He advocated that you could vote, 1, for the party you wanted to vote for, 2, if you had a second preference, and then vote every other party equal last. The phrase is 1, 2, 3, 3, 3, 3. Of course, our government says that you have to vote 1 and tick in all the boxes consecutively until the last box. This was not actually the case, but the government didn't like him telling people about their rights. So basically, they charged him and locked him up for a 10-week sentence. He ended up only serving 3 weeks in the end, but basically, this shut him up for enough time while the election was on to get him out of the road. So basically, you have your rights until you actually try to exercise them. Democracy is 2 wolves and a sheep voting on what's for dinner. So basically, it is mob rule. In Australia, we normally have Tweedledum or Tweedledee, yet we can also have representatives who represent a very, very small fraction of the population, as is the case of Ricky Muir of the Motorist Enthusiast Party, who got 0.51% of primary voting. This is great in the sense that it throws a spanner in the works of government. Yet, it also shows the ridiculousness of the system. Ricky Muir of the Motorist Party is a minority. The do-gooders always talk about how the minorities should get more representation. However, the biggest minority of all is the individual. What is the best way to represent the individual? The best way to represent the individual is through not voting at the polls, but voting with currency. Government currency is an argument for another time, but you can always get some sort of representation, some sort of need met through currency. Through politics, it, at the best, is always only a compromise. Australia has compulsory voting. A number of countries around the world do have compulsory voting, mostly a number of South American countries. Even though they have compulsory voting, it is generally not enforced. It is, however, enforced in Australia. So you are compelled to go vote. Compelled to go vote, meaning that you have to go vote under the threat of violence. If you don't go vote, you'll get an extortion notice, a fine. If you ignore that extortion notice long enough, you'll get another extortion notice, increasing the amount you have to pay. If you ignore that, eventually someone in a uniform and a gun will come around to your place and try to kidnap you and put you in a cage. If you ignore that, you will be shot. Compulsory voting is violence. And it's violence against peaceful people. If you don't vote, is there a victim? No. So you could be sitting home peacefully on a Saturday doing nothing, yet you are under the threat of violence because you refused to sanction your slave masters. The Australian Constitution says that the government represents the will of the people. Prior to 1915, only 50 to 60% of the population bothered to vote. So obviously this was a problem for the government. They need to be endorsed. And to seem legitimate, you need the consent of the governed. So the Communist Wealth of Australia brought out the threat of violence, and in 1915, enrollment was compulsory. This sent voting up to 70 to 82% after that. This obviously wasn't good enough for the government, so then they brought out the threat of violence again, brought out the guns, and in 1924 made voting compulsory. This sent voting up to 90 to 95%. It's time to end the abusive relationship. All the promises that these psychopaths make never come through. It's time to stop putting pieces of paper into a suggestion box for your new slave master. It's the same beast. You cut off one head of this hydra, it'll grow back, but the point is it's still the same hydra, whatever head you vote for.